So today I want to talk about readings and books and basic personal statement related things that for kids applying, for you students who are applying for university this year. I have mainly started making this series and kind of even posting videos in the first place because teaching a lot of students myself, I know how difficult this last year has been for every student and how it's going to continue to be difficult probably for the next year. So I'm hoping that I can help at least one person to feel a little bit more reassured about their kind of future. I know it is a really weird time. So I think the main issue with the COVID effect on applications is that you don't really have as much kind of standard content to include as you normally would. So what I'm talking about there is maybe work experience, Duke of Edinburgh Awards, committee participation, things like that you haven't really been able to do. So what can you do in that case? Okay, so I'll just touch upon the readings and then kind of a summary of other things as well. Bulk up that personal statement with just academic stuff, books, readings, and your insight and what you've taken from them. So I am going to talk specifically about economics and management because that is the degree that I studied. But the same kind of the same logic applies to all degrees. So when I applied a long time ago, I really didn't have any extracurricular things, and I had two sentences at the end which just to talk about the fact that I played the violin or I was part of one society, but that I only that was not really necessary, even that, and I felt like it was a little bit of a waste of space actually, because I could have talked a little bit more about the actual subject degree related readings. So honestly, do not worry, you do not have to include any kind of physical things that you physically done and carried out. I think apart from your readings and your books, the only other things that you might want to consider is entering an essay competition, or if you've done an EPQ, to talk about that in the statement, because that's always a really interesting thing. The other maybe kind of actual content you could include is to do or take some online courses and pick up some skills. So for example, watching a course on edX and EDX, and if you do maybe a couple of weeks following how to code or how to read a balance sheet or something, that can give you some content that you could then apply into your personal statement. But honestly, I've seen so many personal statements and some of them haven't included anything apart from basically analysis of books overall, and it's been absolutely fine and successful at many universities. Okay, so I'm going to talk about what I included back in the day and then some advice to whether you should do that or shouldn't do that. So I personally included, I think it was 6 or 7 different texts, and then the first thing I talked about was The Economist. Okay, so obviously very famous economics journal. I don't recommend actually including, because what I did was I just included the title of it and then said I had been reading this. I think that's really stupid. I don't recommend you do that at all. It doesn't really say anything about the person, because unfortunately, if you apply for economics or economics related degrees, it's kind of taken as a given that you've read The Economist, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, or you've at least had a look at it, so saying that you read The Economist is especially if you're not reading it, there's no way you're reading it cover to cover, because every single week, so it doesn't really make sense to include just the title of it. If you are going to include it, maybe you pick out a specific article from a specific issue, that's absolutely fine, and then comment on it. That would be really good, especially if you could bring something new to the conversation. Absolutely, I would do that. But otherwise, avoid putting just the names of journals and things in to make it look as if you are well read, because at the end of the day, anybody can read it. It's really what you have taken from it. So I really recommend that when you do your readings, of course, read some intro books. Of course, put in 100 most read economics books of all time. Of course, read Free Economics, Armchair Economist, Everlasting Light Bulbs, all of these very popular books. But I would avoid putting any of those books into your personal statement. Similar reasoning to just putting in the title of The Economist, etc. It doesn't look like you've really done your research, and it kind of means that you haven't done your research, I think. If you're just stuck on the first page of Google results, it's not really showing the initiative or the curiosity that you've gone and looked for more. So you can use those as a good starting point, but I wouldn't waste your time trying to read, all of Adam Smith, Milton Friedman, John Keynes. You're not going to have time or probably the foundation necessary to actually read these in any meaningful way. These are texts that you might not even read in full at university. You're more likely to take chapters or read papers commenting on these readings. But they're looking for students who would excel at university. I don't think that. Of course, if you get through it, that's fantastic. But I don't think it's necessary or useful. So try to avoid anyway cliche books, both easy or readable and high level. So what I would do is basically go into economics or management or your course pages, look at the modules that you can choose in usually years 2 and 3, because year 1 tends to be intro, general, everybody has to take it, there's going to be core modules. So when you get to the optional modules, you're going to see a big list of different topics like international economics, development, economics of industry, and then within management maybe it's strategy, tech and ops, whatever. So then I would choose, I would look up each module in turn, see what it covers, look at the content, and then if it's interesting, if it's something that you think, I might study that at university, if I would choose that as an option, then you go away and find reading specific to those modules. So economics is such a massive subject. So if you read more broadly about just basic ideas in it, usually what you end up doing is just looking at micro. So maybe you pick more macro-based books, or maybe you focus more on development economics, which is what I did actually. So I found that to be the most interesting at the time. And then I did actually take that at university, and some of the readings that I did in preparation for my personal statement and interviews, they came in actually quite useful later on when I had to write an essay. They don't give you a huge amount of time. If you keep really good notes on that from now, it does save you time in the future. I mean, you've really started on your kind of academic journey from A level, really. So try and use that all to your advantage. So I chose to include books about The End of Poverty by Jeffrey Sachs, and also The Bottom Billion, Paul Collier. Again, The Bottom Billion is now super typical. People come, most students, econ students have heard of it. So I think, again, I would maybe choose a less typical book, just because if you include something like that, if they do ask you questions about it later, you'll have less to say, I think, that hasn't already been said before. That can be an advantage or a disadvantage. If you give a really fantastic answer, or better than other people have done, or show a greater insight, that's obviously very advantageous. But as a whole, I would probably stick with books that I've done a little bit more research to find. It was good, however, to include The End of Poverty in order to counteract ideas that were in The Bottom Billion, to show an extra layer of understanding, to show that you are not going to kind of almost just take an idea as given. So I think that was good. So I really recommend you do read different viewpoints. So when you first get started, there are going to be many theories thrown at you. These are not all rigorous and, anyway, they're not all kind of opinions that you have to take. In economics, you can have an opinion. You can agree with one school of thought versus another. So try and have a look at the evidence and see if you agree with it. I also included, as kind of an intro book, The Nightmare of the Weimar Hyperinflation. So that book I tied into The Economist, really, but because I think this one, although I wouldn't say everybody should include this book, it's not super standard text. It's the reason I think that was a good addition, and what I recommend you guys do as well, is that it was very relevant at the time when I was writing my personal statement to current affairs going on around me at the time. So quantitative easing was a massive part of the conversation. Inflation and its potential effects due to that was a huge talking point. So I really recommend you include a book or readings based on what's going on around in the world today. Obviously, you've got a wealth of issues you could discuss. Just pick upon something, because that shows a real kind of awareness of what economics and management might be actually useful for. So yeah, I think that was good for that reason. That was all in terms of economics, I think that was all I included, actually. Oh no, apart from, I did include one kind of game theory related point, and in trying to explain how I got to my conclusion, I did include quite an advanced graduate textbook, and obviously I didn't read the entire thing. I went through some of the problems in there to try and show evidence that I had tried to understand this quite complex game theory puzzle. So yeah, that was also, I think, quite a good idea, because of course it shows that you have not only economics is, at the end of the day, an incredibly maths-based subject. So if you can show that you have some inclination toward maths in some way, apart from having taken the usual further maths at A level, I think that's good. I think it shows curiosity, insight, etc. Okay, so that was the economic side. In terms of management, I included some pretty classic texts. Management, less, because economics you do study at A level, I think you have a good starting point and an understanding, which means you can read texts which maybe are slightly more difficult. For the management side, it's very likely that none of you will have studied this at A level. I certainly didn't. Business studies and management do not equate to each other. So even if you've studied business, you don't really have a backing in management, I would say. As a result, I would say maybe stick to more of the classic texts, because of course you don't want to go completely off-piste and start talking about ideas that are that might not make sense at all. So unless you do have somebody who's studied the subject, who teaches the subject, who can advise you, I would use the university reading lists to defer to them and see what you can pick out from there, and pick some quite readable things, but again from different modules. I personally chose to read some of John Kay's work. He is obviously a very famous academic in management, and he's got lots of different books, so you don't have to read the classic, you don't have to stick to the classic books. Again, with Porter, for example, he's a really famous voice in management, but you don't have to just read his 5 Forces book. He's got a lot of other really interesting ideas, so that would be a nice way to show that you've gone a little bit further, maybe. But yeah, I would absolutely stick to the reading list and just have a look around all those different books. In economics, the last book I did include was The Wealth and History of Nations. This book has so many different ideas in it, and so many different complex ideas in it. There's no need to read the entire thing and memorize the entire thing. I think that's a bit silly. So read a couple of ideas within it. That's what I did anyway, and then really try to understand and get deeper into it, and try and link it to other things that I had read, and so on. So for anybody who wants some personal help with their applications, I'm more than happy to take a look at them. If you don't have somebody in your life that you can ask, but do show your reading list, discuss these books with your friends and your teachers and families, because the more kind of advice and the more eyes you get on something, often it helps you to see more clearly, rather than being stuck in your own head about it. And also, share, if you've got other friends applying for economics and management, maybe you could split up the readings and you could each make notes on them and then share them and see. That would save a lot of time, and would also help you maybe get a more critical view of the subject. So I highly, highly recommend working with other kids or students who are, going for the same subject as you. You're not each other's competition. Well, you are, but at the end of the day, it's competition that you'll have to face anyway, so you may as well help each other get there.